The diplomatic frigate Girason came out of faster-than-light travel with a soft hum that shook the coffee cups in the mess hall. Han Dojin steadied his mug with one hand and looked out the observation window. Below them, the crown world of the Rishan sovereignty filled the view like a marble made of pale silver and blue light. Ishara. Even from orbit, it glowed in a way no human world ever did. "Beautiful, isn't it?" said Jinho Park, dropping into the seat across from him. Jinho was the comms specialist on the ship, and also the closest thing Dojin had to a best friend out here in the deep black. He had a habit of grinning when things were about to go badly. He was grinning now. "It looks fragile," Dojin said quietly. "That's because everything about the Rishan is fragile," Jinho replied. "Their feelings, their culture, their skin probably. Don't touch anything. Don't breathe on anything. Don't even look at anything too hard." He was joking, but he was also not wrong. Captain Nari Yoon called the full crew to the briefing room an hour before they docked at the Rishan orbital ring. She stood at the front with her arms crossed, her dark eyes sweeping across every face in the room. Nari was not a tall woman, but she had the kind of presence that made tall people sit up straighter. "Listen carefully," she said. "The Rishan agreed to these talks because the Vreth Dominion is pushing into the border systems between our territories. They need us, even though they will never say it. We need them, and we are not too proud to admit it. That is our one advantage. We are honest about what we are." She paused and let the silence do its work. "Now the rules. The Rishan do not touch, not each other, not outsiders, not anyone who is not bonded to them in some deep biological way that their scientists have not fully explained to us. Physical contact with a Rishan who has not invited it is considered an act of violence. I don't care if someone is falling off a cliff. You do not grab them. You find another way. Is that understood?" Every head in the room nodded. Dojin understood better than most. He was a medic and a xenobiologist. He had spent the last 3 months reading every scrap of information humanity had gathered about Rishan biology. Their cells did not communicate the way human cells did. Instead of chemical signals, Rishan cells used light. Bioluminescent pulses carried information through their bodies the way nerve signals carried information through human bodies. Their healers used carefully tuned light frequencies to treat illness and injury. It was elegant, it was precise, and it meant that the chaotic bioelectric field generated by every living human was, to a Rishan, something like standing next to a loud, crackling fire. Unpleasant, overwhelming, a little bit dangerous. Humans were warm, Rishan were cool. It was that simple and that complicated. The delegation descended to Ishara in a shuttle that felt too small for the weight of what they were about to do. Dojin sat in the back row with his medical kit on his lap. He was not part of the negotiating team. He was there in case someone got sick or hurt or had an allergic reaction to alien air. A background role. He was fine with that. The crystal atrium took his breath away. It was not a room. It was a cathedral of living light. The walls were grown, not built, from a crystalline material that pulsed with slow, rhythmic bioluminescence. Blues and silvers and pale greens moved through the structure like a heartbeat. The air smelled like cold rain and something sweet that Dojin could not name. Hundreds of Rishan stood in rows along the sides of the hall, tall and slender, their silver skin marked with patterns of light that shifted with their emotions. At the far end, on a throne that looked like a frozen wave, sat King Taesung Tel Rishan. He was ancient. Dojin could see it not in wrinkles or gray hair, because the Rishan had neither, but in the depth and steadiness of his light. His bioluminescent markings did not flicker or shift. They burned with a constant, deep blue that spoke of centuries of control. Beside the throne stood Prince Kihyun Tel Rishan, the king's eldest son and military commander. He was tall, even by Rashan standards, and his light pulsed in sharp, aggressive patterns of white and violet. He looked at the human delegation the way a person might look at an insect that had crawled onto their dinner plate. "The flickering ones," Ki-Hyun said. His voice carried across the atrium without effort. "You honor us with your presence." The pause before the word presence made it clear he had considered several other words first. Captain Nari stepped forward and bowed in the Rashan style. One hand pressed to her chest. "Sovereign Taesung, we come with respect and with purpose. The Vreth Dominion threatens us both. We believe we are stronger together." King Taesung regarded her for a long moment. His expression did not change. "You have 3 days to convince me that an alliance with your kind is not a waste of our time," he said. "You may begin tomorrow." That was it. No welcome feast, no warm words. 3 days and a dismissal. As the delegation turned to leave, Dojin let his gaze wander across the court one last time. That was when he saw her. She stood behind the throne, half hidden by a column of living crystal. Princess Yua Tel Rashan, third bloom of the sovereignty. She was younger than the others, and her light was different. Where the court's bioluminescence was controlled and steady, hers moved like water. Soft silvers and pale golds drifted across her skin in curious, restless patterns. And she was not looking at the delegation with suspicion or contempt. She was looking at them with wonder. Her eyes met Dojin's for a brief moment. He felt something shift in his chest, a small, quiet thing, like a door opening in a room he had kept locked for a long time. Then she looked away, and the moment passed. That evening, after the delegation had settled into their assigned quarters, Dojin could not sleep. He wandered to a garden terrace that the Rashan had marked as permitted for human use. It was a small space, open to the sky, filled with plants that glowed faintly in the dark. He sat on a bench made of smooth stone and breathed in the alien night air. "You are the one who watches." He turned. Princess Yua stood at the edge of the terrace, her light dimmed to a soft glow. She kept a careful distance, at least 3 meters between them. "I'm a medic," Dojin said. "Watching is part of the job." "Your people touch each other," she said. It was not a question. "I saw them, hands clasping hands. What does it mean?" Dojin thought about it. "It means different things. A handshake is a greeting. Sometimes it means trust. Sometimes it means comfort. When someone is scared or sad, we hold their hand so they know they are not alone." Yua tilted her head. Her light shifted to pale blue, a color Dojin's research told him was associated with deep thought. "You use your bodies to say what your words cannot?" "Yes," he said. "I suppose we do." She was quiet for a moment, and beautiful. Then she turned and disappeared into the glow of the palace, leaving Dojin alone with the alien stars and a feeling he could not name. In the shadows at the far end of the terrace, a Rashan attendant watched. When the princess was gone, the attendant turned and walked quickly toward Prince Ki-Hyun's chambers. The second day began badly and got worse. The negotiations took place in a smaller chamber off the crystal atrium, a room with walls that shifted color depending on the mood of its occupants. Right now, the walls were a deep, angry red. Prince Ki-Hyun sat across from Captain Nari, and made every sentence feel like a battle. He questioned the strength of human warships. He questioned the reliability of human technology. He questioned, with a politeness that was sharper than any blade, whether humans could be trusted to honor a treaty when their entire species had existed for less time than most Rashan buildings. Captain Nari answered each challenge with calm, steady facts. She had numbers, she had battle records, she had evidence of human fleets holding the line against Vreth raiders in 3 different systems. But Kihun was not interested in evidence. He was interested in making the humans feel small. Dojin was not in the negotiation room. He had been granted a rare privilege, limited access to a Rashan medical archive. A young Rashan healer named Unji had been assigned to supervise him. She kept her distance, as all Rashan did around humans, but she was not unfriendly. She answered his questions with short, precise explanations, and sometimes she watched him with a curiosity that reminded him of Princess Yua. The archive was astonishing. Dojin spent hours reading about resonance healing, the method by which Rashan healers treated every injury and illness. The idea was elegant. A healer would identify the exact light frequency of the damaged cells, then project a matching frequency to guide them back into alignment. It was like tuning a musical instrument, each cell a string that needed to vibrate at just the right pitch. But Dojin noticed something. The system had a weakness. It required perfect precision. If the frequency was even slightly wrong, the treatment did nothing. And if something disrupted the frequency of the cells themselves, if something scrambled the signal, then the healers had no backup plan. There was no Rashan version of brute force medicine, no way to simply flood the body with energy and hope for the best. Their medicine was a scalpel. They had no hammer. Dojin filed this observation away in his mind and moved on. It was an academic thought. He did not know yet that it would save a life. That evening, King Taesung hosted a formal banquet for the delegation. It was a gesture of basic courtesy, not warmth. The humans sat at one end of a long table made of dark crystal, and the Rashan sat at the other. The food was beautiful and strange. Dishes of pale, luminescent substances that tasted like nothing Dojin had ever experienced. Some were cold in a way that went beyond temperature, as if the cold had a flavor of its own. Princess Yua was seated near the center of the table, between her mother, Queen Sumi, and a group of senior courtiers. She wore a formal gown that seemed to be made of woven light, and her bioluminescent markings were bright and active, shifting through soft patterns of silver and gold. Once, briefly, she glanced down the table toward the human delegation. Her eyes found Dojin. She did not smile, because Rashan did not smile the way humans did. But her light warmed to a gentle amber for just a moment before she looked away. Dojin felt Jinho elbow him. "Stop staring," Jinho whispered. "I wasn't staring. You were absolutely staring." Dojin was about to argue when Princess Yua made a small sound. It was barely audible, a soft catch of breath that most people in the room did not hear. But Dojin heard it. He was trained to hear the sounds that people tried to hide. Yua's hand went to her chest. Her bioluminescent markings flickered. Not the gentle shifting of emotion, but a hard, erratic stutter, like a light bulb about to die. The amber warmth drained from her skin and was replaced by a sickly pale gray. Then she collapsed. Her body hit the crystal floor with a sound that silenced every voice in the room. Queen Sumi was on her feet instantly, her own light flaring white with alarm. King Taesung rose from his throne. Prince Kihyun crossed the room in 3 long strides and dropped to his knees beside his sister. "Healers!" Kihyun shouted. "Now!" They came quickly, 4 Rashan in white robes, whose markings pulsed with focused professional light. They surrounded Yua and began their work, holding their hands above her body and projecting carefully tuned frequencies into her failing cells. Dojin watched from across the room, his medical scanner already in his hand, running passive scans of everything it could detect. The healers worked for several minutes. Then the lead healer looked up, and even without understanding Rashan facial expressions perfectly, Dojin could read the fear in the way her light dimmed. "The frequencies are not holding," the healer said. "Something is disrupting the cellular resonance. Every pattern we project is scattered before it can take hold." Then project harder, Ki-Hyun demanded. It doesn't work that way, my prince, the healer replied. Queen Sumi knelt beside her daughter. Yua's markings were fading rapidly now, the light draining from her body like water from a broken glass. Her silver skin was turning gray. Her breath was shallow and uneven. What is happening to her? King Taesung's voice was steady, but his light betrayed him. It flickered for the first time anyone could remember. The lead healer ran a diagnostic scan and went still. Shade toxin, she said quietly. It was in her food. Someone poisoned the third bloom. The room erupted. Ki-Hyun spun toward the human delegation, and his light turned the color of a blade. You, he said, you did this. Captain Nari stood her ground. We did not. We had no access to the food preparation. Your own staff served every dish. You expect me to believe that the one night we allow your kind into our court, my sister is poisoned, and it is coincidence? Ki-Hyun's hand moved to the weapon at his belt, a slim device that hummed with energy. Guards, surround the humans. Armed Rashan closed in. The human delegation pressed together, tense but disciplined. Captain Nari held up her hand, signaling her people to stay calm. But Dojin was not looking at Ki-Hyun or the guards. He was looking at his medical scanner. He was reading the data it was collecting from Yua's failing body. And he was seeing something that the Rashan healers were not seeing. Because they were not looking for it. Because it was not part of their medical understanding. The shade toxin was not just disrupting Yua's bioluminescent frequencies. It was draining thermal energy from her cells. Her body temperature, already low by human standards, was dropping fast. She was going cold in a way that Rashan medicine had no word for, because the Rashan had never needed to think about heat. Their biology ran cool. Their healing was based on light, not warmth. But Dojin was human, and human medicine understood heat the way Rashan medicine understood light. He knew what he had to do. He also knew that doing it would break every rule Captain Nari had given them, every cultural law the Rashan held sacred, and possibly start an interstellar incident. He looked at Yua, lying on the cold crystal floor, her light fading, her breath growing weaker. He thought of his sister. He thought of the colony world, the plague, the hospital bed where he had sat helpless and watched her slip away, because he did not have the right medicine, the right tools, the right knowledge. He thought of the promise he had made to himself afterward, the promise that he would never again sit and watch someone die, if there was anything at all, that he could do. Dojin pushed past the guards. One of them grabbed his arm, and he twisted free without thinking, moving on instinct and adrenaline. Captain Nari called his name sharply. Ki-Hyun raised his weapon, and fired a warning shot that burned a black line into the crystal floor centimeters from Dojin's foot. Dojin did not stop. He did not even slow down. He dropped to his knees beside Princess Yua, pulled off his gloves, and reached for her with his bare hands. The moment Dojin's hands made contact with Yua's skin, every Reshion in the room reacted as if he had drawn a weapon. The sound they made was not a gasp, not a scream, but something between the two. A sharp collective intake of breath, followed by a wave of bioluminescent flaring that lit the banquet hall like a storm. Silver turned to white. White turned to violet. The colors of shock and horror rippled through the court like a shockwave. Queen Sumi stumbled backward. King Taesung gripped the edge of his throne. A dozen courtiers turned away, unable to watch. What Dojin had just done was in Reshion culture one of the most violent things a person could do to another. Uninvited touch, skin to skin, with a dying princess who could not consent. Ki-Hyun raised his weapon again. This time it was not a warning. His light burned white-hot, and his hand was steady. "Remove your hands from her," he said, and his voice was the coldest thing in the room. "Remove them, or I will remove them for you," he said. "If I let go, She dies, Dojin said. He did not look up. His eyes were on Yua's face, on her fading markings, on the shallow rise and fall of her chest. His voice was calm, but his heart was hammering so hard he could feel it in his teeth. Give me 60 seconds. You have no right. 60 seconds. Then you can shoot me if you want. Ki-Yun's finger tightened on the trigger. Captain Nari stepped forward, placing herself between the prince and her medic. Let him work, she said. 60 seconds. If she gets worse, I will pull him away myself. It was not clear whether Ki-Yun agreed or simply could not bring himself to fire through a woman who was standing her ground without fear. Either way, he did not shoot. Dojin's hands were pressed against Yua's arms, his palms flat against her silver skin. She was cold, colder than any living thing he had ever touched. It was like holding ice that was shaped like a person. He could feel the absence of warmth in her, a terrible emptiness where life should have been. The shade toxin had stolen her heat, and without heat, her cells could not generate the energy needed to produce light. Without light, her cells could not communicate. Without communication, her body was shutting down organ by organ, system by system, like a city losing power block by block. But Dojin was warm. Every human was warm. The human body maintained a core temperature of 37 degrees, a furnace by Rashan standards, and every human body radiated a chaotic bioelectric field, a messy, untuned storm of electrical signals that the Rashan found unpleasant and overwhelming. To a Rashan, being touched by a human was like being touched by a live wire wrapped in a heating pad. Dojin was counting on exactly that. He pressed his hands harder against Yua's skin and willed his warmth into her. He could not tune frequencies or project bioluminescent patterns, but he could do something no Rashan could do. He could burn. He could pour raw, unfiltered, chaotic human energy into her failing body like throwing fuel onto dying embers. 3 seconds passed. 5, 10. Then Yua shivered. It was a full-body convulsion, a tremor that started in her core and radiated outward to the tips of her fingers and the ends of her hair. Her back arched off the crystal floor, her lips parted in a silent cry, and her bioluminescent markings, which had been fading to gray, flickered. The Rashan court went absolutely still. Dojin did not understand the significance of what had just happened. He did not know that in Rashan biology, a shiver was not what it was in human biology. Humans shivered when they were cold. Rashan shivered when their cells received a signal powerful enough to restart communication after it had been broken. It was called a resonance cascade. It was the biological equivalent of a heart restarting after it had stopped. It was rare. It was sacred. And it had never, in the entire recorded history of the Rashan species, been triggered by an alien. But the Rashan knew. Every healer in the room recognized what they had just witnessed. The lead healer covered her mouth with her hand. 2 of the junior healers dropped to their knees. Queen Sumi made a sound that was somewhere between a cry and a prayer. Yua shivered again, and this time her markings did more than flicker. They reignited. Light surged through her body in a wave, starting from where Dojin's hands touched her skin and spreading outward like dawn breaking across a dark landscape. Silver first, then blue, then a warm gold that no one in the room had ever seen on Rashan's skin before. The color was wrong. It looked like sunlight, and the Rashan had no sun. Their world orbited a cool dwarf star that bathed everything in pale blue. The gold light was coming from Dojin. His warmth, his human heat, was mixing with her bioluminescent signals and creating something entirely new. Yua's eyes opened. They were wide and unfocused, and full of a light that had not been there before. She looked up at the ceiling of the banquet hall without seeing it. Then her gaze shifted downward, and found the face of the man kneeling beside her. The man whose hands were on her skin, whose warmth was flooding her body, whose chaotic human energy was doing what an entire team of Rashan healers could not. She looked at Han Dojin, and she saw him. "Enough," the lead healer whispered, stepping forward with her scanning instrument. She ran it over Yua's body, and Dojin watched her expression change, from shock to confusion, to something that looked very much like awe. The toxin is retreating. Her cellular communication is re-establishing. She is stabilizing. "She's not healed," Dojin said quietly. "The toxin is still in her system, but the thermal transfer destabilized it enough for her immune response to start working again. She needs sustained warmth to keep the toxin suppressed while her body fights it off." The healer stared at him. "You are saying that your heat is what saved her? I'm saying that your medicine is a scalpel, and right now she needs a furnace. My body runs hot, yours don't. That's all this is." It was not all this was, and some part of Dojin knew it. But he was a medic, and medics dealt in facts, not feelings. The facts were simple. Human body heat had done what Reshan resonance healing could not. The rest could wait. Guards pulled him away from Yua, and he let them. His hands were tingling and his skin was flushed from the contact, from the strange sensation of pouring his warmth into a body so fundamentally different from his own. He stood between two armed Reshan and looked at Captain Nari. "She needs sustained warmth," he said. "I can explain the treatment to their healers if they will let me." Nari looked at him with an expression that mixed fury and pride in equal measure. "You just committed an act of cultural violation against a dying princess in front of her entire family." "Yes, and it worked." "Yes." King Taesong had risen from his throne and walked across the banquet hall. He moved slowly, his ancient light steady and deep. He stopped in front of Dojin and looked down at him. The king was a full head taller than the human, and his presence was immense. Centuries of authority compressed into a single gaze. For a long moment, no one moved. No one breathed. "Release him. Bring him to the healing chambers." Ki-hyun opened his mouth to protest. One look from his father silenced him. As the guards escorted Dojin out of the banquet hall, a sound came from behind him. Yua's voice, weak and thin but clear, speaking a single word in the Rashan language. "Tahlin." The effect was immediate. Every Rashan in the room froze, as if the word had turned them to stone. The healers stared. The courtiers stared. Ki-hyun stared. Queen Sumi closed her eyes and pressed both hands to her chest. Dojin did not understand the word. He would learn later that Tahlin meant anchor, a term used for a person whose resonance had bonded with your own at the deepest cellular level. It was the most intimate word in the Rashan language. It was spoken between bondmates, between souls that had chosen to intertwine their light forever. It had never, in the entire history of the Rashan people, been spoken to an alien. Dojin walked on, unaware of the earthquake he had just caused, and the doors of the banquet hall closed behind him, like a held breath finally released. The royal healing chambers were built deep inside the palace, where the walls pulsed with the slowest, steadiest bioluminescence on all of Ishara. The light here was meant to be calming. It moved like a sleeping breath, in and out, a rhythm designed over centuries to soothe damaged cells and quiet distressed minds. Dojin found it beautiful. He also found it completely useless against shade toxin. The Reshan healers stood in a loose circle around Yua's resting platform, a raised bed of living crystal that monitored her vital signs through direct contact with her skin. The lead healer, a woman named Mireille, who had been practicing medicine for over 400 years, watched Dojin with an expression that sat somewhere between professional respect and deep personal discomfort. He was a human. He was standing in the most sacred medical space on the planet. And he was about to tell her how to do her job. The toxin targets your bioluminescence signaling network, Dojin began, keeping his voice calm and his words simple. He had learned a long time ago that the best way to explain medicine across a cultural gap was to speak plainly and leave ego at the door. Your healers have been trying to fix the signal, but the toxin is not just breaking the signal. It is draining the energy that powers the signal. Think of it like this. Your healing is like repairing a lamp, but the toxin is not breaking the lamp. It is cutting the power line. Mireille tilted her head. Her markings shifted to the pale blue of deep thought. And you are suggesting that your body heat is the power line? Human bodies generate heat constantly, 37 degrees at core temperature. My bioelectric field is untuned and chaotic by your standards, but it carries thermal energy. When I touched the princess, that energy transferred into her cells and gave them enough power to begin communicating again, even through the toxin's interference. It is crude, Mireille said. It is, Dojin agreed without offense. But crude is what she needs right now. Your precision healing cannot get through the toxin's disruption. My thermal energy can. If we combine both, your precision with my heat, we can keep her cells powered, while you clean the toxin out, frequency by frequency. Mireille looked at her fellow healers. A long, silent conversation passed between them in shifting patterns of light. Then she turned back to Dojin and gave a single nod. Show us. The treatment was unlike anything either species had ever attempted. Dojin sat beside Yua's resting platform and placed his hands on her arm. The contact sent a visible ripple of warmth through her markings, and the healers watched their instruments with wide eyes as her cellular energy levels rose. Then, while Dojin held her temperature steady, Mireille and her team began the delicate work of isolating and neutralizing the shade toxin, one cell cluster at a time. It was slow. It was exhausting. And it required Dojin to maintain physical contact for hours at a stretch. During the first long session, Yua drifted in and out of consciousness. When she was awake, she watched Dojin with quiet, luminous eyes. Her light was still weak, but it was steady now, a soft silver that pulsed in time with his heartbeat rather than her own. The healers noticed this and said nothing, but Dojin caught them exchanging glances. "You are very warm," Yua murmured during one of her waking moments. Her voice was thin and tired, but there was a trace of humor in it. "I'm human," Dojin said. "We run hot, it's our one trick. It is a good trick." She was quiet for a moment. "I scared everyone." "You did. I scared you?" Her markings flickered with something he was learning to read as vulnerability. "Yes," he said honestly. "You scared me very much." She closed her eyes, and a faint pattern of warm amber moved across her skin. He did not yet know that amber meant trust. While Dojin worked in the healing chambers, Captain Nari and Jinho were working on a different problem. The shade toxin had not come from the human delegation. Nari knew this, and she intended to prove it before Ki-hyun used the accusation to destroy the treaty negotiations entirely. Jinho was a comms specialist, but he was also very good at finding information that people wanted to keep hidden. He spent hours analyzing the communication records that the Rashan had grudgingly made available, cross-referencing them with the timing of the banquet and the preparation of Yua's food. Captain Nari pressed the Rashan security chief for access to the palace kitchen records and the staff duty logs. What they found was chilling. The shade toxin had been synthesized on Ishara, not imported, not smuggled in by the human delegation, but created in a laboratory on the Reshan homeworld, using Reshan materials and Reshan knowledge. The trace signatures in the toxin matched a production method used exclusively by a small faction within the Reshan military, a group of officers who believed that any alliance with humanity would weaken the sovereignty and dilute the purity of Reshan civilization. The trail did not lead to Prince Ki-hyun directly. He was cleared by the evidence. But it led to people in his circle, officers who served under his command, people who had access to the palace and to the princess's food. The assassination attempt had not been aimed at starting a war with humans. It had been aimed at ending the possibility of peace. When Nari presented the evidence to King Taesung, the old king sat in silence for a very long time. His light did not flicker. It dimmed, and somehow that was worse. "My own people," he said at last. "They would kill my daughter to keep us apart from your kind." "Not all your people," Nari said carefully. "A small faction, but a dangerous one." "Yes," the king agreed. "Dangerous." He gave the order. The conspirators were arrested quietly, without spectacle. Ki-hyun supervised the arrests himself, and Jin-ho told Dojin later that the prince's light had been the color of a dying star the entire time. Cold. Grieving in a way that went beyond his sister's illness, and into something deeper, the realization that the threat had come from inside his own ranks. On the second day in the healing chambers, Ki-hyun came to visit. He stood in the doorway for a long time, watching Dojin hold his sister's hand. The human looked tired. He had slept only a few hours in the last 2 days, and the constant thermal transfer was draining his own energy. But his hands were steady, and his voice was gentle when he spoke to Yua, explaining what the healers were doing, telling her about the stars he had seen from the Jirasan, describing the flowers that grew on human colony worlds. Ki-hyun said nothing. He watched for several minutes, his light shifting through colors that Dojin could not read. Then he gave a slow, deliberate nod, the kind of nod that carried the weight of everything he could not bring himself to say, and left. Yua recovered fully on the morning of the third day. When she stood from the resting platform, the healer stepped back and stared. Her bioluminescence was not just restored. It was brighter than it had been before the poisoning. Her markings pulsed with a richness and depth that made her look like she was lit from within by a small star. The warm gold tones that had first appeared when Dojin touched her had not faded. They had woven themselves into her natural patterns, creating something entirely new, silver and gold intertwined. Mireille scanned her and shook her head in wonder. "The thermal infusion stimulated dormant cell clusters," she said. "Cells that have been inactive since childhood. She is generating more light than any Rashan I have ever recorded." Yua looked at her own hands, watching the new gold light move through her markings. Then she looked at Dojin, and her expression held a warmth that needed no translation. That evening, Queen Sumi came to see Dojin. She found him alone on the garden terrace, where he had first spoken with Yua. He was sitting on the same stone bench, staring up at the alien stars, with eyes that were heavy with exhaustion, but light with something like peace. "The word she spoke," Sumi said without preamble. "Talin, do you know what it means?" "Anchor," Dojin said. "I looked it up." "Then you know what it implies." "I know what the translation says. I don't know what it means to your people." Sumi studied him. Her light was steady and deep, like her husband's, but there was a softness to it that the king's did not have. "It means that her cells recognized yours, not as foreign, not as hostile, as complementary. It is the deepest bond our biology can form, and it chose a human." She paused. "I am not warning you, Dojin. I am telling you what you are to my daughter, so that you understand the weight of it." Dojin nodded slowly. "I've been carrying some for a long time." Sumi regarded him for a moment longer, and then she did something that no Rashan queen had done in living memory. She inclined her head to a human, a gesture of genuine respect, and left without another word. The next morning, King Taesung summoned the full court. The 3 days were up. The human delegation was brought before the throne, and the fate of 2 civilizations waited on the words of an ancient king. The crystal atrium was full. Every seat, every alcove, every standing space along the walls held a Reshan citizen of rank. Their bioluminescence filled the vast hall with a shifting sea of silver and blue, a living tapestry of light that rippled with anticipation and unease. Word of what had happened in the healing chambers had spread through the palace and beyond, carried by whispers and the restless pulse of a people who did not know what to make of the impossible thing that had occurred in their midst. A human had touched a princess. A human had saved a princess. A princess had called a human her anchor. The world had not ended, but it had tilted, and no one was sure yet which way it would fall. The human delegation stood near the entrance of the atrium. Captain Nari Yoon was at the front, her uniform pressed and her posture perfect, looking as if she had slept 8 hours when Dojin knew she had slept 3. Jinho stood behind her, with the rest of the crew, his hands clasped behind his back and his eyes sharp. Dojin stood at the edge of the group, slightly apart, in the same spot he had occupied on the first day. But everything was different now. On the first day, no one had looked at him. Today, every eye in the room found him at least once. King Taesung entered last. He walked slowly, not from age or weakness, but from the deliberate gravity of a man who understood that every step he took in this moment would be remembered for centuries. Queen Sumi walked beside him, her light steady and deep. Prince Kihyun followed, in full military regalia, his expression unreadable, but his light a controlled shade of pale blue. And behind them, walking on her own feet, with her chin held high, and her markings blazing with silver and gold, came Princess Yua. The gold in her light was visible to everyone now, woven through her natural silver like threads of sunlight in moonlit water. It was beautiful. It was also deeply, profoundly alien to Rashan eyes. That gold was not Rashan. It was the mark of human warmth living inside her, a permanent reminder of what had happened and who had made it possible. The king took his throne. The court fell silent. Taesung did not speak immediately. He let the silence build, let it press against the walls of the atrium until it was a living thing, heavy and expectant. Then he began. "For as long as our history remembers," he said, and his voice filled the atrium without effort, resonant and old and sure. "We have believed that the universe is divided into 2 forces. Light, which is order, harmony, the way of the Rashan, and heat, which is chaos, entropy, the burning force that destroys what light creates. We built our civilization on light. We built our medicine on light. We built our understanding of the universe on the belief that light was sufficient, that it was everything we needed, that heat was an enemy to be avoided and feared." He paused. His gaze moved across the court, touching every face. 3 days ago, my daughter was dying. Our light could not save her. Our healers, the finest in the sovereignty, could not save her. Our knowledge, gathered over thousands of years, could not save her. Another pause. This one was longer and heavier. A human saved her. The court shifted. Light flickered through the crowd in waves of color. Discomfort and awe, and denial and wonder all tangled together. He did not save her with precision. He did not save her with elegance. He saved her the way his kind has always saved things, by reaching out with his bare hands and refusing to let go. He poured his heat, his chaos, his fire into my daughter's body, and her light came back. Not because heat replaced light, but because heat gave light the strength to burn again. Taesung leaned forward on his throne. "I have ruled this sovereignty for 600 years. I have made decisions that shaped the lives of billions. And I tell you now, plainly, that I was wrong. We were wrong. Heat is not the enemy of light. It is its partner. Chaos is not the destroyer of order. It is the force that keeps order alive when order alone is not enough." He looked directly at Captain Nari. "Your people are loud. You are messy. You burn too brightly, and you die too quickly. But you reach out. When the universe is falling apart, you reach out, and you hold on, and you do not let go. We have lived for thousands of years, and we have never learned how to do that. Nari held his gaze and said nothing. She did not need to. Her presence was her answer. The treaty will be signed, Taesong declared, not as a favor to a lesser species, not as a concession born of necessity, but as a recognition that we are incomplete without each other. Light needs heat. Precision needs instinct. The long-lived need the short-lived to remind them what urgency feels like. The court erupted, not in protest, though there were voices of dissent, but in a cascade of bioluminescence that turned the atrium into a storm of light. Colors clashed and merged and separated and reformed, the visual equivalent of 1,000 voices, all speaking at once. And then Princess Yua stepped forward. She walked to the center of the atrium, to the open space between the throne and the human delegation. Her light was blazing now, the gold threads burning brighter with each step. She stopped and turned to face Dojin. The court went quiet. Yua extended her hand, not in the Rashan way, not pressed to her own chest in formal greeting. She held it out toward Dojin, palm up, fingers open. A human gesture, an invitation to touch, offered freely, in front of her father, her mother, her brother, her entire civilization, by a princess whose people had never allowed such a thing. Dojin stared at her hand for a long moment. He could feel every eye in the room on him. He could feel the weight of what this meant, not just for the two of them, but for every human and every Rashan who would come after. This was not a medical procedure. This was not an emergency. This was a choice, made in the open, witnessed by a court that had believed for millennia that such a thing was impossible. He stepped forward and took her hand. The moment their skin touched, Yua's markings flared. The gold in her light surged outward like a sunrise, mixing with her silver until her entire body shone with a color that the Rashan had never seen before. Warm and cool at the same time, steady and wild at the same time. A frequency that belonged to neither species and both. Where their hands met, a light was brightest, the small sun born from the meeting of fire and moonlight. No one in the crystal atrium moved. No one breathed. Ki-Hyun stood in his military regalia, tall and rigid, his light carefully controlled. He did not smile. He did not speak. But after a long, heavy moment, he placed his fist over his chest, the Rashan military salute, and directed it at Captain Nari. Nari looked at him, and something passed between them. Not warmth, not friendship, but respect. The respect of two soldiers who recognized strength in each other. She raised her hand to her brow in a human salute. The treaty was signed that afternoon. The terms were detailed and specific. Mutual defense agreements against the Vreth Dominion, shared intelligence on border incursions, trade routes, cultural exchange programs. But one clause had been added, at the quiet suggestion of a human medic who had no official standing in the negotiations. A joint medical research initiative to explore the intersection of thermal and resonance-based healing. The Rashan healers and human doctors would work together to develop treatments that neither species could create alone. Mireille had been the first to support the proposal. She said simply, "I watched a man with no training in resonance healing do something my 4 centuries of experience could not. I would be a fool not to learn from that." The Jirasan prepared to depart the next morning. The crew moved through the pre-flight routines with the quiet efficiency of people who knew their mission had succeeded, but were too tired to celebrate. Dojin packed his medical kit, ran a final check on the ship's infirmary, and then made his way to the observation deck. Ishara hung below them, a globe of silver and blue, glowing softly against the blackness of space. It was still beautiful. But it looked different to Dojin now. It looked like a place he might come back to. Jinho found him there, leaning against the railing, with his arms crossed. "You look like a man who just changed the course of galactic history, and doesn't know how to feel about it," Jinho said. "I feel tired," Dojin said. "You held a princess's hand in front of her entire civilization. You should feel more than tired." Dojin smiled. It was a small, quiet smile, the kind that came from somewhere deep. "I feel like I finally did something right." Jinho clapped him on the shoulder and left him alone with the stars. A minute later, Dojin's communicator chimed. "Private channel, Rashan encryption." He tapped it, and Yua's voice filled the small space around him, clear and warm, and carrying a trace of amusement that he was learning to love. "The Joint Medical Initiative requires a permanent human liaison on Ishara," she said. "Someone with experience in xenobiology and a proven record of cross-species healing. I have personally recommended a candidate to my father." Dojin closed his eyes. "I wonder who that could be." "He is very warm," Yua said, "and he has a good trick." Dojin laughed. It came out of him like something that had been locked away for years, full and real and bright. It echoed off the walls of the observation deck, and startled a crewman walking past in the corridor. He did not care. He stood there laughing, with Ishara glowing below him, and Yua's voice in his ear, and the stars burning all around. And for the first time since he had lost his sister, for the first time in a very long time, the warmth inside him did not feel like a burden. It felt like a gift. Below them, the crown world of the Rashan sovereignty turned slowly in the light of its pale blue star. And somewhere on its surface, in a palace of living crystal, a princess stood at a window and pressed her hand against the glass, watching the human ship above her, her markings shining with silver and gold, glowing brighter than she ever had before.